nicely. Nate, wow, no music. So today was amazing, and we're so excited to have you guys here for the closing plenary, and actually to see so many of our speakers in the audience now. That means we're doing a good job. We are, as always, excited to be joined by our live stream audience. Those guys have hung in, and they've been amazing, and they're loving this experience too. So hello, people around the world watching us. How many of you in the room have done your DHL postcards? Oh, good kids and bad kids. Bad kids. Tomorrow I'm going to ask this question again, and every hand better be up. For those of you who didn't hear about this, there's a DHL postcard in your delegate pack that allows you to say something that you want for the future and to say what you will commit to do in your own personal life in order to achieve that future. And there's a yellow mailbox out in the lobby. You're going to drop that postcard in, and a year from now, you will get it back in the mail so you can see your own personal progress and just get a little personal hint of what's happening with the SDGs. So please do that. Also, the live stage has been going strong. There's an insert in your agenda. Those talks have been wonderful today, and they will continue tomorrow, so make sure you check those out. Ditto with the Knowledge and Innovation Fair, which is happening throughout the lobby, as you all know. There is also a virtual reality zone, a VR zone that's going on. You can look as cool as the folks in this photo. They are having a lot of fun, trust me. And that is just in the glass rotunda through toward the restaurant. So check out the VR zone if you haven't done already. It's incredibly cool. And there aren't too many opportunities you'll get to try these out. So I promise you it's going to be worth it. Keep doing social media. You guys have been doing an amazing job. Tweet using the handle @GlobalFestIdeas and the hashtag GFI4SD across Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram, and all your platforms. We also have a lot of photos up on the Flickr site now. So we've been obviously filming and taping throughout the conference, and those are going up on all sorts of sites, YouTube, Flickr, under a Creative Commons license. You can go and check them all out. And the URL is flickr.com/globalfestideas. So tons of photos that are awesome. I actually saw one of you during the visualization exercise that looks like she's sleeping. So tweet that photo a lot and be like, no, we were visualizing. We weren't napping. But there's tons of amazing photos up on Flickr. Make sure you go and check them out. And now some fun things that we want to tell you about that have been going on sort of in the universe of the conference. These cards, does anybody know what these are? They're sort of like you hang them, they're swing cards basically. You hang them on doorknobs. There have been 5,000 of these put on 100 public buses all around Bonn. And on one side is the entire agenda, there you see. And here, basically, take this home with you. So it's just another way that we're spreading the SDGs and doing that local communication that we've been talking about. And it's something that hasn't really been done in Bonn before. So it's that municipal partnership sort of spirit that we've been discussing throughout the conference. And I'm just going to give you a little live preview, too, of the boat. You all know we're going to be on the Rhine this evening, and it's going to be amazing. But I just want you to know, in case you leave, who's pronouncing it properly? Somebody over here was doing a Rhine echo for me. But it's basically inside. It's more than a boat. It's essentially a ship. And we are going to be leaving at 7 o'clock. 6:30 boarding will start. And we're actually docking back at 9:15. So even though the party will keep going, if you want to go to bed, we understand. You'll be able to get off at 9:15. But we're going to have dinner and drinks and a lot of fun on the boat. So that will happen at 7 o'clock. And with that, this evening's plenary features a panel debate on the data revolution and a 2030 HiveMind recap and update. You guys have been doing awesome playing the games. We're super excited. And our program then continues with that evening on the Rhine that I was talking about, which will be dinner, drinks, socializing, networking, and just a good breather for all of us to get together and talk about today. And before I introduce our data revolution panel, we are going to be using Slido again. And really, this is the session to use it in, let's be honest. But I know some of you weren't here when we talked about it yesterday. So just as a quick refresher, you're just going to go to slido.com on whatever device you have and input the hashtag GFI4SD. It's been a long day. GFI4SD, and then you'll get the interface loaded up. So you can enter your questions in there, and then we'll all be able to see all the questions that are entered and upvote them as we like. If you don't have a device or you need help with translation or anything else concerning Slido, just raise your hand, And one of our blue-shirted expert volunteers will walk over to you and make sure that that's handled, and you can get your question in. And then our wonderful moderator, who I'll introduce in a second, will be able to ask your questions to the entire panel. So with that, it is my pleasure to hand over to Claire Malamud, Executive Director at the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data, who will be moderating the panel, Harnessing the Data Revolution to Reach the Missing Millions. Claire?
Thank you very much. So as Nadira said, my name is Claire Malamud. I am the Executive Director of something called the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data, which for those of you who haven't heard of it, and why not, it is it's a network of more than 200 public sector, private sector, civil society organizations who've come together to see how we can help to work together to improve the data that we need to monitor the Sustainable Development Goals, but even more critically, the data that is needed to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. As I'm sure you've been already discussing in different sessions today, we see data very much as part of the infrastructure, the critical infrastructure to achieve progress, not just a way of monitoring whether or not it's happening. I have to say I'm fairly new in this job, and in a previous life I was working at the Overseas Development Institute and was involved in the very early days of this festival. So it's a particular thrill to be here and to see how the ideas have so magnificently come to fruition. So I also just wanted to congratulate all my former colleagues at ODI and the team at the SDG Action Campaign and all the other partners who've been involved. It's an absolutely tremendous. And you always start, when you start to plan something, you have a kind of picture in your head of what you want it to be like. And often, as we all know, through various, as practicalities intervene, the event starts to fall short. But I think this one has certainly exceeded my initial vision. So well done to all of you. Let me now introduce my panel for the substance of this this discussion now. So here on my right is Philip Shonrock, who is the director of CEPE, which is a Colombian civil society organization think tank. On his right is Caspar Setemba, who is works in the executive office of the deputy president in Kenya, and we'll hear in a moment some of the exciting things that are happening there on data and the data revolution. Then on Caspar's right is Dr. Meng Xiaoli, who is the chief economist at the Tencent Institute. Again, been doing some interesting research, particularly in China, that we'll hear about in a moment. And on her right is Soumya Chattopadhyay, who is a senior researcher at the ODI. Now, I think for those of you who've been playing the game, the Hive game, which I have very enthusiastically and have quickly become very competitive about my place on the league table, you will perhaps have noticed, perhaps not have noticed, that actually this is a game which is built from data. The raw material that we are using, all of the relationships in the game, all of the ways in which goals move up and down, and the ways in which we're looking at the interactions between goals and the assumptions that have been made and constructed in the game are based on models that are entirely built from data. Now, the game is the game, it's not the real world, but it is, I think, a kind of illustration of how absolutely fundamental data is to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals and any goals, any public policy goals that countries have, any business goals that a company has, any social goals that a civil society organization has. We need to know at the most basic level, we need to know what we're doing in order to do it. It sounds stupid and simple, but in fact, that is what data is about. So, I think those of us, again, who've been kind of thinking about data in a somewhat abstract way for a long time were a little bit surprised, sort of slightly rabbit in the headlights surprised at the sudden focus, political focus on data and the way in which it's so quickly risen up to the top of political agendas. To my mind, this presents us with an opportunity, but also quite a responsibility to actually do something about it and to make the most of this political opportunity that we have to actually seize the moment and do what we can to improve the data, which will then, we hope, lead to better policies and ultimately to better outcomes. So that is very much, for me at least, the context of the session this afternoon. And I just wanted to start really with a question to all of the panellists who, as you've heard, come from very different perspectives, very different places in this debate. But I think particularly in relation to the SDGs, we're in a slightly paradoxical situation where we have really established a set of goals which have made very clear and very explicit that the focus of global public policy, at least in part, is on the very poorest in different societies, the most excluded. We're focused on reducing inequalities, on providing services to the very poorest, on trying to find ways to help people to manage their environments and so on. And yet, just at the point, at the same time as having this public policy focus on the very poorest, at the same time as there is this growing consensus on the importance of data as an essential input into that public policy, we're also confronted by the fact that we actually know least about the people who we have decided through the SDGs are the most important focus of our policy. And it's this paradox about knowing the least about the things that we have collectively decided to care about the most that is one of the things that we're going to be exploring today. So let me just start with the kind of obvious question, having framed it like that, which is to ask the panel why they think this is. Why is it that the data on the very poorest is in such a sorry state, inaccurate at best, and sometimes entirely absent? Philip, let me start with you.
Hi, Claire. And good afternoon to everyone. Well, I would go back to the basics, actually, to ask myself the question and ask it to you, who's actually collecting the data and who's actually going after the data in order to leave no one behind. And I think that's our major problem that we're having at this very moment, because we are data scientists, statisticians, researchers working on data collection, but we actually never include those that we want to get the data from. So it is actually a quite simple answer that I would say I would go back to the communities that we're working with. I would actually include them in the recollection of the data, because who else than them could give us actually the opportunity to see and to distill actually and segmentate this data. I come from a region, Latin America and the Caribbean, we're the most unequal region in the world, and we actually know the least about the people we are talking about that we want to reach out. So I do believe we have to go back to see who is recollecting the data, who is actually analyzing this data, because it is quite difficult to be in an office building on the 35th floor, crashing and mining data and even visualizing data without including a human being. I mean, I know a data set, algorithm, it's something not very humanistic, so we have to go back to that basic sense and back to the communities and actually start recollecting data with them, because that's the point that we can learn then, and actually much more than giving them very nice and innovative technologies back, we actually get much more lessons learned from them by analyzing it together with the communities.
Thank you, Philip. And I mean, I think also in a moment where, you know, the media at least is full of stories about the kind of lack of trust in data and politicians whose names I shall not name playing rather fast and loose with facts and data. I think this point about sort of building much more the social consensus around data and people seeing themselves and their concerns reflected in that data is a critical part of rebuilding, or at least maintaining the public trust in the data. So I think that's a really helpful point to start with. Casper, let me turn to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Claire. I think for me we have to look at the context at individual country perspectives. And I think there's some places and some countries whereby not collecting this data has been used as a tool of oppression, so that you find that through historically in a country, certain policies or legislations have been in place not to collect certain data or disaggregated data to ensure that certain parts of a community or certain parts of a country remain disadvantaged. And I'll give you an example from my country. I think what we've learned, first of all, is that on poverty and in inequality, that there's a possibility of that leading to political violence. And that's because those communities that are most disadvantaged can gang up together and cause that violence because they've been disadvantaged. And I'll give you an example. When we did our 2009 census, and we tried, I think the National Bureau of Statistics tried to collect data on tribes. And from certain political quarters of the country, that became a very hot issue because when you collect data on a certain population, and data is used for resource allocation, so if a certain minority community or a disadvantaged community suddenly becomes one of the most populous in a census, it's a sort of a political manipulation. So I think, to underscore your question, one of the reasons why we don't have that much disaggregated data on those most left behind could just be politically motivated. Yeah.
It's really, really interesting. Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Claire. I would like to discuss this question based on our experiment. Actually, my company is Tencent. I just gave a brief introduction. There are 700 million netizens in China, but for our company, we have 800 million users, which means that almost every netizen in China have our apps. Wow. So for last 3 years, we use the big data to draw a digital map of China. So basically, it's describe all the online activity of every Chinese of China. So in this heat map, you can say that it is very bright in the southeast part of China, but it's totally dark in the northern west of China. So we just go to the village and trying to find why. And we go to the village, we find that in those isolated village, you didn't see the people whose age is between 15 to 50. They all are migrant workers. They go to the first tier and second tier city to find a job. So you go to the village, you know that technology can change their life, but all the people you can reach is just those people who are either too young or too old to adopt or to take advantage of the technology to change their life. So this is something I think SDG should focus on.
That's really interesting. Thank you, and it's a useful sort of break on some of the more utopian views about what new technologies can do to fix some of these things that we've been talking about. Samia.
Thank you, and can I make a small digression? Claire mentioned the game, and I'm sure all of you are playing. What she didn't mention is, or what we didn't mention is, that she's the one who actually first thought about this possibility of the game. So for all those who have enjoyed it, a round of applause for her, please.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Coming back to the question, I mean, I'm a sort of data practitioner. So I look at data, sort of look at trends. And one thing which strikes me is, as Claire kind of put it initially, that SDGs are designed with a data infrastructure in mind, which is going to reinforce and inform. And so it's a kind of as envisioned, it's a sort of a virtuous cycle. But then there is nothing concrete in the process which says that if you are not in the virtuous cycle and you're stuck in the sort of vicious cycle of not having data, then you have less informed policies, and you're stuck in that process, and there's no natural mechanism to break out of it. In terms of why we know so less about sort of the most marginalized, I'd say, I'll give you an example. Part of it is just instrumental, and because of the nature of surveying and getting the data itself is an impediment. We're doing at ODI this whole notion of, we did a study on the children's poverty in the slums of sort of some countries, and we started with those children in the slums of Dhaka. Now just think about it. This is a slum, so they're never in any official record. So if you base your surveys on randomized sampling or whatever is your instrument of choosing people, it's an illegal or sort of not legal or sub-legal sort of community. So they'll never be on the record, so why will they ever be sort of in the sampling design? Secondly, you want to look at the children within that slum. No survey actually ends up asking questions to people, to children. So how would you know about their poverty and how they're getting exploited? So there is a sort of systematic bias in the way we've done things. But that's not a flaw of the SDGs, but that's the nature of the instruments we've been using. So maybe we just need to sort of look beyond that and sort of devise new systems. And that needs money, political will, also academic interest to sort of expand the scope of what we've been doing, because business as usual is not delivering. They've been caught in this chronic sort of lack of information for generations or decades. So something new has to be done.
Thank you. I think that's a great sort of comprehensive view of all of the different barriers that there are to providing better information on specific groups: the political, the technological, the methodological, and then the fact that by definition this is a group of people who are not often enough asked their views taken seriously by politicians, by researchers, and so on, and almost this becomes a kind of circular problem which reinforces itself. Just to probe a little bit more then into each of your kind of specific experience and different take on this. Casper, Kenya has been a leader. The government of Kenya was one of the earliest and most enthusiastic founders of my organisation, of the Global Partnership, and has really, you sit within the Deputy President's office at the level of the executive, has really put a lot of focus on data and on the benefits that investments in data and innovation can bring to Kenya in terms of human outcomes, in terms of economic progress, and so on. And I know that, sitting within the executive, you're charged with trying to implement all of these policies and deliver on progress in data. But you do that obviously through a complex political system and many other institutions, and I suspect that it's probably not quite as easy as it may seem. So do tell us a bit more about what it feels like actually trying to get something done on this.
Thank you for that. I think the very first thing is to identify what the challenge is and try to get ahead of that challenge before you can move on the next steps. And I think for Kenya, once we realized that initially the problem was political, we had a new constitution in 2010, a new political settlement that expressly recognized that there is a group that had been marginalized in the country for quite some time. And then after recognizing that, there were certain policy and legislative frameworks that were set in place to address that. But now the next challenge came that now we are to overcome was the challenge of data, disaggregated data, and we're living in an era of data revolution. So we realized that we needed signaling from the topmost office in the land to say that, look, we want to really harness the data revolution for sustainable development. And I think in 2015, the president and the deputy president committed themselves in an op-ed in one of our local dailies to create an inclusive data ecosystem that will harness citizen-generated data from the academia, development world, and all that. And I think now from there we launched a national partnership for sustainable development data. And one of our main goals was to create data communities or data collaboratives whereby where there is a data gap, someone can fill it in. And I think where that has worked really well for Kenya is on the health data collaborative. Salu's not very formal grouping of organizations from government, civil society, development partners. And basically the idea is to share data and to build the capacity of each other on data. So I think really that signaling was the most critical. Now, the next step really is to leverage on technology. And I'm glad Tencent is saying here, basically, because technology makes collection of that data cheaper and much more affordable. But I think the important thing also is to allocate more resources towards collecting this disaggregated data, because once the political situation is okay with it and the settlement is in place, policy and legislation is in place. So I think now is to focus more on the technical aspects of collecting this disaggregated data, but also eventually to use this data for decision making, for planning, and also for monitoring and implementation.
And do you want, while you have the microphone, just tell us a little bit about some of the issues that you've found in trying to sort of, disaggregation is partly about disaggregating between groups of people, it's also about decentralizing and going down to the sort of very local levels and you know, having to get the cooperation and consent of local authorities. And do you want to just tell us a little bit about how that experience?
Yeah, so for those who may not know much about Kenya, we have a national government and 47 sub-national governments, which are basically headed by governors, and they have what we call members of county assemblies. Now, the challenge of disaggregating data basically comes in resource allocation. So, for instance, we have an index that we use for dividing resources between national and county governments, and one of those critical components or weightings in that index is the poverty index. So you want to get data to show that county X or county Y is the poorest, or county X and county Y has not, for example, taken care of women with disability, maybe there are health issues. And that's a good thing because you want to allocate more resources towards that. But then that comes at the risk of exposing the governor of that state that maybe is not doing his job. So, and remember, when it's election year, you require sometimes the support of those governors to be re-elected, even if you're the president. So really, it's a political trade-off, and you have to really convince them that we need this data so as to allocate more resources or to reallocate even what is already existing. Or if you collect more revenue, maybe through taxation, we could easily allocate county X or Y, who have been historically marginalized, more resources. But you need that data.
Yeah.
So that trade-off is sometimes very complex.
Fascinating. All these things, even the most technical subject like data, it always is political in the end, isn't it? And it always comes down to that. Let me turn to you, Soumya. We have been accused, various people, there were lots of really interesting questions coming up on the Slido, and we will try to get to as many of them as we can. One person says it's rather vague talking about data and trends, and we are, you know, wanting to know a little bit more about how we can transform it into real practice. So I just wonder, for you as a researcher who's looking across the whole range of data, in a sense, and who has all the data sets to play with, for you, what are the priorities? What are the things that we really should know more about in order to be able to do better, to make that jump from data to practice?
Well, before we can actually, so one priority would be, before we jump from data to practice, have good data. And by good data, I would say, so basically going to the zeroth principle before we get to even the first principle, is that we really know very little about what we call the tails of the distribution. I mean, any sampling we do, we have a central tendency on an average. Well, the on an average is not the focal point of leaving no one behind. So we've got to focus, and we've started doing at ODI and other institutions. We've started sort of launching these stock takes, and a new project that we're about to start, which is called Voices of the Poor. If some of you might remember, about 20 years ago, the World Bank did this large 60,000 face-to-face interactions, and it led to 3 books called Voices of the Poor. And for many people in the developing, sort of following the development agenda, that led to the helping of prioritizing what poor people actually want, which fed into the priorities of the MDGs. Fast forward 20 years, we're at the similar kind of a threshold for SDGs, but we don't really have a similar metric. So getting something like the Voices of the Poor and sort of adding to that the technological advances and the sort of tools that we have at our disposals, which are large survey samples, which are, as Casper was mentioning, specifically focused at the disaggregated level. We're going to individual households, individual responders, and finding out more about what their needs are, what their priorities are. That would be number 1 priority. And number 2 would be, well, we can only start, but we also need trending. it should not just be a snapshot in time. I mean, Claire herself was involved with the UN My World survey, which was one single question, which revealed so much about people's priorities, or the poor people's priorities in general. But to sort of use that and other sort of survey instruments to find out more about the people themselves and their needs, their aspirations, and where policy is not meeting, and doing it consistently in a systematic way across time and across countries is, I think, one of the priorities.
Absolutely. Thank you. And Meng, you talked a little bit earlier about some of the challenges that you were facing with the kind of mobile phone-based data collection, and some of the ways that that was perhaps missing out certain groups of people. I mean, I wonder if you can talk a little bit more about sort of going into detail on that, and also some of the ways in which you think, what are some of the ways to overcome that? I mean, as we heard from Casper already, and I'm sure from others, there's, you know, there is a lot of optimism about the way that new technologies and mobile technologies should be able to help to improve coverage, to lower costs, to improve the speed at which we can gather data. So to your mind, what are the most promising things that are out there that are going to help us to really fill some of these critical data gaps?
Thank you, Claire. 3 years ago, in 2014, we started a project in the philosophy that we believe technology can help those people who left behind. And the most valuable investment for them is a smartphone, which is less than $100. I think it's affordable for them, and if they know how to use a mobile phone, it will open every opportunity, like the education, like the job opportunity, like the medical care, anything related with their lives. So we selected 1,000 people in isolated province in China, and we send mobile phone for free to them, and the mobile phone and the mobile phone plan, which means the data service for free. And we also cooperate with the best university in China, send a research team to the village and trying to train them how to use the mobile phone to find new opportunity for them. But 6 months later, after we start the project, those researchers go back to Beijing and they complained a lot. They are so frustrated. And just a few examples, they said it's almost impossible. It is so difficult for you to teach them how to use mobile phone, especially when your audience is some illiterate people who are either too young or too old. And they said they never thought this will be a problem. For instance, when you took a photo and you instantly know you will find your photo in your photo album on your mobile phone. But it is so hard to explain such kind of thing to the people in the village, especially they never touch any PC in their whole life. So this is their first digital thing for them. So it is so difficult. And they said it's like teaching foreigners to learn Chinese. And another problem is that they just can't see why they need to use a mobile phone. For instance, one of my researchers just follow a guy the whole day and to track how they use mobile phone. But actually, he followed the guy for a whole day after the sunset. Only after the sunset, when the guy wants to go back to home, he needs some light. Then he remembered that the mobile phone can be a torch. Then he turned on the mobile phone, but it's already out of battery. So the guy told my researchers that, so it's totally useless. So after 6 months, previously when we start the project, we want to collect the data. We want to use the data to tell us what is their true needs. And we think with enough user data, we can build some tailored content to help them. But actually, after 6 months, we almost gave up. But just at that time, we find some very inspiring example. I will just give you 3 examples. The first example is that a illiterate woman who is in her 40, who is in her 50, she don't care about mobile phone at all. But one day, her son, who worked in the first-tier city, broke his leg. Then somehow the woman know mobile phone can help her to do some video call. So just in a few days, she knows the difference between Wi-Fi and 4G. Every night, she will find some free Wi-Fi hotspot and stay there and talk with her son. This is one example. Another example, we form a WeChat group. If you guys don't use WeChat, you just know this is a digital discussion room for all the people in the village. We formed that group for like 6 months, and it is almost silent all the time. And one day, the chief of the village sent out a message, said, this year, the poverty subsidy goes to A, B, and C family. The poverty subsidy is some subsidy given by the government, but they have only 3 quotas in the whole village. Then it's like a bomb. Suddenly we found all the people just jump out, and it's a woman also in her 50s. He said, why it goes to A family? I will give you quite a few reasons why my family should get the quota rather than her family. Okay, finally, this is kind of democracy revolution.
Accountability, yes.
Yeah, and the third example is that our peasant found that if, one day one peasant find a pest on the plant, but she don't know what the pest is. So he took a photo and sent to the WeChat group. Then within just a few hours, other people, the isolated village directly with comparatively high price because they see the photo and they see this is true organic food without some pesticide. So by and by, those people learn how to use the technology to change their life.
Yeah.
And everything is about SDG goals. It just makes their life better. So finally, we got the conclusion. In the first place, we make things wrong. We thought we can touch them. We thought we send a research team to train them to learn how to use the technology to change their life, but it's wrong. What we should do is just, they need to be connected. Then that is a basic function. Then after that, they will find their inner motivation by themselves.
Absolutely, and I'm reminded very much, fascinating stories, and I'm reminded really with sort of Philip said at the very beginning about making things relevant to people, ensuring that what we're doing always
development stakeholders is quite low these days when we're talking about a private company and you're talking to them data for social good. So how is this affecting my business? How is maybe our company going ahead of it with my data? So where is actually the win-win situation on those partnerships? And it's certainly not only turning on the Wi-Fi again in order to share all this information, but it is to create data ecosystems that are coherent for everyone to be engaged. So I believe, first of all, clear rules of engagement, so it's an enabling environment that builds trust. And then, of course, we have to talk about the quality of the data. And last but not least, and I believe that's something very important for the partnerships, is how do we share actually data? Because sometimes we have, not sometimes, we have many problems these days in sharing data. There are people willing to give it. There are national statistical offices that do not know how to handle that kind of data. So what we have tried to do, first of all, is map data ecosystems, the possibility to see what is actually out there at this very moment, to see what private data we have, what civil society is producing, international organizations, and as well, of course, our statistical offices. And this is actually, well, it says, yeah, everybody can do that. Yes, you can. But the problem is, go into the detail. What kind of data do we have? PDF files, yeah, wonderful. Ask a data scientist what they think about a PDF, and then we get this thing rocking a little bit, talking about getting partnerships done. So we have to really look into that, very basic but very important things in order to make a data ecosystem work for the SDGs. And that's what we're trying to do, but much more important is then when we gather all this data, what do we do with it? And to who we transfer it, and what can we do in order to policy planning, in order to really have a monitoring and evaluation system, and last but not least, how do we engage citizens in order to use it as well? And I believe this is something where, for example, the game is showing us how do you actually use that kind of things. And I just want to remind you that actually it was with a very nice wine next to the ODI office where we talked first of all without a Wi-Fi about that game, and now I'm actually in the last places of it, and I don't know what did I do wrong until this very moment, because I thought I was a front runner there. So we actually have to see that data ecosystems are a little bit more friendly for dreamers as well, like myself, so I can get a little bit higher on the score into it. But if that doesn't work, we go for other wine and talk about the next game for the next conference.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you very much. I mean, if I'm allowed to editorialize for a minute, I think in previous lives when we were thinking about the SDGs and about partnership, you know, I used to very easily reach for, oh, partnership, it's all about partnership. And I have to say that running a partnership, I now feel I have no less commitment to the idea of partnership, but increasingly I feel that in some ways the most difficult partnerships are the ones that are actually the most worth having. You know, when it's easy, in a sense, you don't really need a partnership. People will work together anyway if they have aligned incentives and common ways of thinking and a common understanding of objectives. It's where it's really difficult that actually you get the biggest added value from the partnerships that we are creating for data as for so many other things on the SDGs. Did you want to come in, Casper? You looked like you were trying to come in there. Okay. Now we have, I'm very aware that we are sitting between you and the boat, which we are, I think, all very intrigued by and excited by. But we've had a lot of really interesting questions, so I want to just make sure that we get a chance to come to some of those, and then I'll give the panel perhaps a few seconds at the end for any last thoughts. I mean, the most popular question on the Slido is around the ethics of big data, bearing in mind that not all of the panel are experts on big data. I think there are broader ethical questions, and by all means, I think whoever asked the question and is supporting that would be very pleased to have some thoughts on that. But I also think for me, there are broader ethical questions here around collecting data particularly about the poorest and most marginalised people, who, in a sense, are the furthest away from understanding that data, being able to use that data, being equipped with the kind of educational tools and technological equipment and so on that we've been hearing about that will allow them to really exercise that sort of, the kind of accountability over that data. There are also specific ethical questions that come not just through big data, but also survey data, and where you're dealing with populations and people and individuals who are already very marginalized, often discriminated against for various reasons, and we're trying to make them more visible. Sometimes they don't want to be visible, they want to hide, because in that comes greater safety. So I think there are many ethical questions, partly about big data, but also partly about the whole exercise of really trying to focus in on a group of people who are extremely powerless and often, discriminated against in some very specific and brutal ways. So I wonder if the panel would like to comment either on this specific big data question or more broadly on the ethics around this topic that we're debating. Who wants to start? Sonia.
I mean, I'm not diminishing by any means the whole sort of concern about ethics of big data, and sort of you can also include that into, expand that into including Big Brother watching you. But I mean, for development sort of process and prospects and the kind of challenges we're facing right now, I think before we even start worrying about big data or ethics of big data, I think that's a second order sort of concern. The more primary proximate concern is we don't have the data. So, I firmly believe that what gets measured gets then managed. And right now, that's the challenge, that we are not measuring or sort of capturing the sort of the needs of the ones who need the most in leaving no one behind. The data doesn't exist. In fact, as recently as last year, the World Bank, which is a repository of so-called huge data, said there are 77 countries for which they have no or only one data point for only one indicator of poverty, which is income poverty, forgetting about the other multiple dimensions of poverty. So with one data point or no data point, you can't even draw a trend line. So while the ethics of big data might be a problem and is a problem, but I think, the focus perhaps should be on first getting the data. And I've worked in universities, I've worked in sort of data gathering institutions, and I've used the data, and I think we have fairly robust research guidelines about what we can do and how we can sort of safeguard who's revealing their information. So that's a sort of secondary concern as of now, but that's just my personal opinion.
Thank you. Do you want to speak specifically to the big data question, perhaps?
Yeah. About using the data, actually, I think our company is the largest data company in China, but we are very conservative about using the big data to see what people are doing. So right now, what we do is that we only do two kinds of data. First is the whole sample data. When we draw the digital map of China, especially for the heat map of to describe the activity of users in China, we use the whole sample data. It's not about individual. We just see how the whole sample do. And another one is that we actually do some crowdsourcing and ask people to give us information with their permissions. This is other kind of application, just in some public service section.
Okay.
If you would like to report something, then with your consent, you can use. With your consent, you can just report by our WeChat system, and we will combine all the data together and give some alarm to the government. That is another way to use the data. This is, I think, for any private company, the privacy is the first priority. If we lose something there, then we will lose the trust of the whole users. So it is very critical. Yeah.
Before I turn out to Casper, I'm quite interested to a little mini audience survey here. How many of you would be completely happy to have all of your personal data used by governments under certain circumstances, but to allow government's access to all of your Twitter data, all of your Facebook, all the data that you produce all the time, if the government were to promise that it would use that data to help to achieve the SDGs? How many of you would be happy to just throw it all out there if you had that commitment? That's not very many. How many not happy? Yeah, most of you pretty suspicious. That's really, really interesting. Thank you. Casper, over to you.
I think from a regulatory perspective, the issue of the ethics around open data, I mean, the Open Government Partnership Movement has been advocating for open data and access to information and getting a lot of countries to pass access to information laws so that, you know, a lot of data should be open. But I think there's also the question of data protection. I think countries also need to have some minimum data protection laws to ensure that data, you know, of citizens is not used for inappropriately. And for those countries especially that are in areas where there's violent extremism and the possibility of terrorists using that data or that data falling into the wrong hands, I think the need there is even more important. I think for me, some sort of minimum data protection laws to protect citizens will be important.
Thank you. Philip.
Well, going back to your question, if I would allow my data to be used or that the governments have access, I mean, to be quite honest, I already think they have the access to it, and the only thing that they're not telling us what they're doing with it, and that's the scary part actually out of it, because we are seeing the dark side of data, and it's becoming more and more clearer that we are actually exposed much more, and we always take that clear example. I mean, do you leave your door open at home at night so that everybody can walk in and out? Well, I believe not these days. So why do we actually do that on our daily lives with a cellular phone, with our computers to it? So I believe it is not only about ethics, it's a way of life that we are having at this very moment, that we are simply not seeing the danger, but also the big opportunity if we have clear rules of engagement. But these clear rules of engagement have to be on all sides. It cannot be that ones have to apply. Me as a citizen, I have to apply so many laws, and I actually have to be so restrictive on getting data from governments these days, even though that we have an open data charter and so on and so forth. But on the other hand, they can use all my data without even telling me. And that's where my big concern is, because if they want to go into my Facebook account or Twitter, hey, give me a break, or whatever, you can do that and be happy with it. And I share the picture if they want to as well. I don't know what they will do with it, but on the other hand, it is truly important that our data is not used in ways that we don't at least know it. And then, if we actually release it, I would like to know what comes back from it. Because when we are always asked to give our data away, I have never got a return, look, what we actually did is A, B, and C. And that's something that we have, is she saying we have no more time?
Yeah, we've got no more time.
We're supposed to go to the boat?
I've got one more question for all of you that you're going to get about 10 seconds each. So
just what are we dancing tonight? Or no, not that one, no? Okay, so we go on.
So my last question is, and I'm sorry that we didn't get a chance to cover more of the questions, but I think a lot of the things that the questions that people have raised have actually been covered in the things that people have said, is we have a game we are playing that we're going to hear about more in a minute, which is about allocating money to policies in order to achieve things. So my question to all of you is, if we had a data game and you were able to allocate money to something which would improve the data collection, which would help to solve this problem that we've been talking about, what would you put your money into? Let me start with Meg.
Yeah, definitely 4G plane subsidy.
4G. Okay.
Yeah,
Very
I
clear,
think the
thank
most important thing is get people connected.
Yeah.
Then people need some free internet access. Yeah.
Thank you. Soumya.
Picking out people who have least access to formal ways of sharing the data.
Thank you. Casper.
For me, it would be, I don't know, subsidize the cost of mobile phones and data so that everybody can access at least mobile telephony in my country.
Interesting. Thank you. And Philip, last word
As
to you.
Casper mentioned everybody, I would actually invest in everybody and create more capacities in order to understand what can we do with the data and what use can we make out of it later on for policies or even for a better lifestyle within our communities.
Thank you. Right. Well, there's our advocacy agenda. Thank you very much indeed.
So much to Claire and to our entire panel. Guys, I have a bit of data for you. And you're going to want to stand for this. I know normally everybody wants to sit for big news, but get up. And this is such big news, in fact, that I've officially become the girl that just WhatsApped my fiance in his office and said, please live stream us right now, because we're about to make a huge announcement. Before I came in here, I got the biggest high five of my whole life from Simon Johnson at Free Ice Cream, because what did Free Ice Cream do? They designed 2030 Hive Mind with the wonderful ODI folks. And the reality of that high five was that we officially achieved our first SDG in 2030 Hive Mind. There is gender equality in the country you all have been building policy for. And then, moments ago, Ishbel walked over to me, and what did you say, Ishbel?
I said we just achieved our second goal.
So goal 3, good health, and goal 5, gender equality, officially been achieved. You did that. Give yourselves a huge round of applause. And DATA did that. And UN SDG Action Campaign and ODI did that, and that's more of what we're going to keep doing. So with that, Ishbel's going to come give us a big update. I've probably let the cat out of the bag about the biggest part of the update. But high five all of each other.
Just to tell you how it went today. So loads of people were playing, hundreds across the day, so that was brilliant. This slide was actually prepared a few moments ago, which showed we didn't quite reach the good health goal, but now we know we did in the last few minutes of the gameplay today, so fantastic. Gender equality was a big outstanding goal that succeeded quite early on in the day, and there was a bit of kind of rivalry between the players around those goals throughout the day, which was fantastic. Earlier on, I was telling you that one of the ways to play the game is not just to play individually, but to play together, and I think one of the results of that was we saw a lot more people coming together today around the tables, and actually virtually there was a lot of tweeting around it as well. I also talked a little bit about our tendency to group around skyscrapers policies. We're still doing that. There's a lot of skyscraper policies out there that people are tending to go for. But actually, overall, this is a little bit misleading because in the course of the day, there were a lot more policies activated, I think kind of 11 or 12, compared to just 4 in the morning. So again, you're looking for different ways to activate the goals. And I think one of the great things is that people were thinking about how to reach their goal, but they're also understanding actually some policies have a really negative effect. And that's when we saw in our fictional country, civil society protests start up. So basically, these guys had twigged that if people were investing, as they were heavily, in health, housing and education, it had a negative effect on life under the water. So they were protesting and asking people not to invest in that. Are the guys who did this here, actually? Are they still out there? Okay, so we're just about to show you what the impact of that was. So if you see the top line, that was health, housing policy that people were investing in. That was the moment, that big drop, when you guys started protesting. And actually, what it shows is that all the other goals started going up and benefiting from that. So that is a demonstration of the power of protest. So where are we and where do we need to get to tomorrow? It's obviously a shorter day, but we're all playing a lot better. So what we really want to do is get a few more of those goals in the bag. We really like to do everything. We'd really like by 2030 to say we have achieved what we set out to do, which is 7 of the SDGs. So to do that, the guys who have been playing for health and also equality, you now do not have to try and reach that goal. It stays fulfilled. So you can now switch into collaborating with others to try and achieve their goals. So we've had some amazing players today. I've just got a list of our top 4. It's Michaela, Ushlender, Paul, Scriptoria, and Lucia Marie. Are any of you in the room at the moment? Or are you playing? Right, hi guys. So you were our top players today. You were all trying to get to gender equality. You've done that. Well done. Now we need your skills and talents across the other ones. So what we'd love you to do tomorrow is all play and try and get some of the other goals to succeed as well. Now, what we're going to do to help you do that, today it was really successful, that session we had around the gaming table. A lot of people came together and got some tips from Simon and others, on how best to play at this particular point. So we're going to run 2 sessions, one at the top of the coffee break and one at the top of the lunch hour. So you can get campaign groups together and go to those desks, and you'll get some ways to help us get over the line and succeed in the goals. So thanks very much, guys. Lot to play for, as they say, and an update tomorrow at the end of play. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ishbel. And can I tell you, my favorite part of this narrative is that yesterday there was also all this discussion sort of behind the scenes about how young people were playing the game, but there was a little bit of reticence maybe about diving in from the grown-ups, the more grown-ups, I guess. And the awesome thing about this is that we had a sort of trickle-up effect in the game, right? So as our protesters got excited and some of our other players got excited, we really saw everybody come together and play. So that is brilliant, and hopefully is a good way of giving us hope across the board. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And you can follow progress on the game with the hashtag 2030HiveMind. And these guys will be around and continue to keep us updated and tell us how exciting things are in the fictional land where the SDGs are getting achieved already. So now for the boat, the ship, Captain. It is called Miss Rhine Fantasy, which I have to share with you because that's awesome. And it's literally docked just 300 meters that way. The easiest way is to go through the Rhine. There's a woo right here. Anan is ready. Is go through the Rhine lobby, but get your stuff together and your coats and everything first before you go, because this venue will be closed by the time we get back. If you leave, though, you can walk around the venue right out to the ship as well, so you'll be all set. But boarding is starting at 6:30 any moment now, and it is leaving at 7 o'clock, and you won't be able to swim to it. So be there before 7. And the party will go for quite a while, but we are going to be on the river for about 2 hours and then back here. So if you want to work or do whatever else, you will be able to disembark. It's going to be really beautiful. So we hope you'll join us and have dinner and drinks and do some socializing and celebrate our SDG achievements today. And really, you know all the other announcements. Do your postcards. Please tweet. Please use the hashtag GFI4SD across all the platforms, and continue to chat with each other. We are loving every moment of this. And for those of you who don't join us on the boat, you should know that tomorrow morning our sessions start at 9. The theme is disruptors, so you really should be there. You're going to enjoy them a lot. And they're all in your agenda, so don't worry. You're going to be in good shape. Have I forgotten anything? And because there's no opening plenary. That's why I said that. You don't get to hang out with me in the morning, so make sure you go into your sessions. And one other quick update. Some of you have thought that it says policy simulation, that it's the same policy simulation throughout. It is not. They've all been brilliant. They're all different, and tomorrow's will be on disruption, which, of course, is the theme of sort of the future. So please go and check all of those out. And we did. Thank you guys so much. We'll see you on the boat on Miss Rhine Fantasy.